بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد بن عبد الله والهاشمي القرشي قائد الغر المحجلين وشفيع المذنبين وسيد ولد آدم وصاحب اللواء المحمود والحوض المورود وعلى آله وأصحابه أزواجه وذريته ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين وبعد. So alhamdulillah, we're able to gather once again to read from the masterful work of Sayyidi Muhyiddin al-Qadir al-Jilani, al-Fath al-Rabbani wal-Fayd al-Rahmani, the sublime revelation. And here, this Fath that he talks about, this Rabbani, even though it's translated as revelation, it doesn't mean wahi in the sense of prophetic revelation. For the Prophet ﷺ and the rest of the prophets, they received wahi, whereas the followers of the prophets, they received something similar but not the same. And we can call that ilham, we can call that inspiration, we can call that fath, opening, enlightenment, we can call it fayd, right, which means outpouring of divine wisdom and divine meanings. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can also, just as He communicates to us via the scripture, via the Quran, which is a timeless communication, and via the Sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ, and via al-Waqa'a', the book of creation itself is communicating to us. Whenever the Quran mentions to us, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةٍ لِلْمُتَوَسِّمِينَ, for example, فَاعْتَبِرُوا يَا أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ. So in this, there's as there are signs, the mutawassim, right? And the mutawassim is the one who knows how to read that very specific way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala communicates to us, namely in the way of occurrences and of could be tragedies, it could be calamities, but it also could be blessings, and it could be bliss. These are all ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala communicates to us, specifically to ما هو محل نظره, that which is what His divine gaze falls upon, namely our hearts. So they said, القلب بيت الرب والقلب محل نظر الله. القلب بيت الرب. The heart is the temple of God, in the sense that this is where all of those meanings come. And in one of the hadith, Qudsi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this hadith Qudsi, لا يسعني أرضي ولا سمائي ولكن يسعني قلب المؤمن أو كما قال. The heavens and the earth cannot encompass me, but the heart of the believer can encompass me. And obviously, this does not mean ittihad and hulul. It doesn't mean that we are union, or we form a union with God in the physical sense, but it means the one who can interpret the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who understands what is ما وراء السطور, what is behind the lines and what is behind the curtain. والأسطار, that's namely the human being, the believer, because they can see that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though their senses are taking in what's going on around them, the meanings are falling into the heart. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can also communicate to us via the hearts of other believers and via the hearts of the awliya. That's why such a stern warning to the one who opposes the awliya. مَنْ عَادَ لِي وَلِيًّا فَقَدْ آذَنْتُهُ بِالْحَرْبِ. Whoever has opposed or has made an enemy, proper translation, better translation, of one of my awliya, فَقَدْ آذَنْتُهُ بِالْحَرْبِ, then I declare war on such a person. Because they are also a vehicle by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can communicate to us. So He communicates to the heart of the believer, of the righteous believer, or the muqarrab, or the bar. So someone who's in the maqam of taqreeb, or someone who's in the maqam of bir, doesn't matter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a way that He communicates with those people, and those meanings are in their heart via al-Qadir al-Rabbani, via divine inspiration in that heart. And then if they choose to share it with us, either via their tongues, from what they say, like Sayyid Abd al-Qadir does in this book, or Sidi Ahmed ibn Ata'illah al-Secondary does in the Hikam, and Lata'if al-Minan, and Taj al-Arus, and other books, and like Sir al-Asrar, another book of Sidi Abd al-Qadir al-Jilani, and al-Futuhat, Shaykh al-Akbar. All these books are ways by which some of these meanings that which came to the hearts of these awliya can then be brought forth for others to benefit from. So we pray for Sayyid Abd al-Qadir al-Jilani and all the rest of the awliya who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose these men and women by which to preserve the deen, preserve, each one of them is preserving one or more aspects of the deen. So we wouldn't say, for example, oh, what about Imam Malik and Imam al-Shafi'i, Ahmed ibn Hanbal, Nu'man, Abu Hanifa, and what about Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, and what about Ibn Kathir, and what about Imam al-Zahabi, and what about Imam al-Nawawi? Each one of those people, they are awliya, and we see them as having reached a very high pinnacle in their relationship, their own personal relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at the same time, they were people by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to preserve this deen. Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. We have sent down this dhikr, namely the meanings of the Quran and the Quran itself. Wa inna lahu lahafidhun. We have sent down and these meanings, or we have revealed the dhikr, the remembrance. Wa inna lahu lahafidhun. And we are the ones who will preserve it. So it's interesting that the word that's used in the verse is dhikr, which is am. It's a general term. It didn't say inna nahnu nazzalna al-Quran wa inna lahu lahafidhun, right? Or inna nahnu nazzalna al-wahi, or that we have preserved the wahi or have preserved the Quran, because all of those are included in dhikr, in the remembrance. And the way that we go about interpreting the Quran and the way that we go interpreting the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and then embodying the meanings and then living those meanings, this too has been preserved. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to preserve it in different ways. Make no mistake that the Quran itself, the way it has been preserved, has been via people, via human beings. It's not like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this sort of indispensable, authoritative, written copy document, right? That then was discovered somewhere, and then we say, oh, here's the Quran, we have it. No, it was actually, or is actually, continues to be preserved via dhikr, via remembrance. The ones who commit it to their hearts and the ones who live its meanings from one generation to the next. This is the mode by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to preserve the meanings of the Quran and the meanings of the Sunnah and the actual text as well, the words of the Quran and the words of the Sunnah. So this is a continuous thing, and it's continuing. And the verse says that, Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikr wa inna lahu lahafidhun. So nazzalna dhikr, right? We have revealed the remembrance, and then the second part, wa inna lahu lahafidhun. So hafidhun is ism fa'il, which means in Arabic language that this is a continuous thing. It's not like Allah preserved it once and left it alone, but it's being continually preserved. So that being the case, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the manner by which He chose to preserve the text of the Quran and Sunnah was via human beings. So each canonical recitation of the Quran has a list of human beings who preserved that and recited that, and via as-sanad al-muttasil, right, and via the unbroken and unassailable chain of transmission for all of the different qira'at, the different recitations of the Quran, we now know that this is authoritative, not because we necessarily have a written copy, but via the riwayah and via the sanad al-muttasil. Same thing with the hadith. The text of the hadith itself is also preserved in this manner. And also the way we interpret, the way that we live it has been preserved. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose someone like Imam al-Shafi'i to preserve the manner by which we understand the ahkam al-shar'iyyah, manner by which we understand the legal rulings and how we extrapolate legal rulings from the Quran and the Sunnah and from the other ancillary sources as well of qiyas and ijma' and istishab al-hal and istihsan and the other things that some of the jurists they talk about. And the same thing for the Sunnah, right? Those words are applied to the Sunnah. And there are others that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to preserve the the manner of inculcating the meanings of the Quran and Sunnah and internalizing them and actualizing them in terms of actualizing our tawheed, our observation and witnessing of the oneness of God in His acts and in His names and attributes and His unique essence. So the act of internalizing that has also been preserved. The science or the discipline of internalizing that has been preserved. The discipline of refuting misconceptions as applies to these particular tenets of faith also has been preserved, right? And there are different madaris, there are different schools by that which is done. So we have four main schools, for example, in terms of how the fiqh rulings have been preserved: the Hanafi and Maliki and Shafi'i and Hanbali schools, which are not just a single person who has the eponymous founder of it, no, but all of the scholars who number in the thousands who worked on it, who made tahrir and tasheeh, right? Who did muraja'a. Imam Malik called his book al-Muwatta, right? The well-trodden path, because many scholars had a look at it before he actually released it. And many scholars, even after the passing of Imam Malik, studied it and offered commentaries upon it and so forth. In Aqidah or in theology, in matters of faith, we have two main schools, right? Whose main goal was to refute misconceptions and clear misconceptions around the nature of God and the nature of His attributes and the relationship between those two things and the nature of the afterlife. So we have the Ash'ari and the Maturidi schools who represent Ahl Sunnah in terms of how we interpret that. And then in matters of ihsan, right, the third part of the Hadith Jibreel, in terms of, well, how do we make this into a morally excellent way? How do we go about imbibing it, inculcating it? How do we go about having a tarbiyat al-nafs, right? Having a riyadat al-nafs, so purification, spiritual purification of the soul, right? And the dampening of the lower passions and the ego and the appetites, in order so that the better part of humanity can then come forth, which is our angelic part or our spiritual part, which is the receptacle for the divine meanings. That it also is a discipline, and it has been referred to by different names. So sometimes ilm al-tazkiyah, sometimes ilm al-ihsan, sometimes ilm al-tasawwuf, right? So Sufism is not some strand of Islam that's outside of Islam, and it's not a cult, it's not a different group, it's not a different, any sort of set of different criteria applied to it. It is a discipline, and a mature discipline of Islam, just like fiqh is, just like aqidah is, just like ilm al-hadith, just like ilm al-tafsir, just like ilm usul al-fiqh. All of these things are disciplines that have matured, that have been developed, and have their practitioners and their ulama and their scholars by which they are able to preserve it and to maintain it and then to transmit it to generations after that. So Sayyid Abd al-Jilani, even though he was a scholar in many of those disciplines I just mentioned, but his main legacy is in the science of tasawwuf, or in spiritual discipline. And so he wrote to some degree, but he also left behind people, right, who then carried on this legacy. So the methodology of Sayyid Abd al-Jilani is preserved in the ones that came after him, and then the ones that came after those people. And it was transmitted much in the same way that we have the other sciences and disciplines were transmitted. That's why we say, this is a transmitted deen. هذا علم موروث. We always refer to it as an inherited or a transmitted tradition, because that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to preserve it. He preserves it through one generation to the next by enabling capable people, who we would call them Ahlullah, the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to imbibe it, to live it, to practice it, and then via their deeds and what they say and their ahwal and their states, they're then able to transmit it from one generation to the next. So whenever we have khalal, whenever we have a gap somewhere in that whole process and how it's transmitted and how it's passed on, then we see things that are affiliated with Islam or attributed to Islam but don't look like Islam. So the whole, extremist phenomenon of ISIS and Qaeda and Daesh and all that stuff, all of that, there's khalal, the Khawarij, It's happened in our history before. All of that, there was some discrepancy in that whole process. So, the Khawarij, the original ones, they didn't have Senate. None of them, not a single one of them was a Sahabi. None of them were companions. So that they were cut off from the way of the Prophet ﷺ because they didn't have a single companion amongst them. And in fact, they fought the companions. They fought Sayyidina Ali and they fought Sayyidina Muawiyah and others of the companions. So this shows you there was no barakah in that type of false, pretense type of sanctimonious Islam. And that type of, unfortunately, that version of Islam comes about every so often. And in fact, you could probably make an argument that it kind of, stays around, usually at a very low level, but sometimes when it's backed up by, forces that cause it to rise above kind of the froth that where it belongs, then you might see more of a wide fitna associated with it, as we could probably make an argument for the times that we live in. So we read books like this and others because this is what Islam is to us. And this is what Islam has been to our predecessors and the predecessors of those predecessors and so forth. So always seek the well-trodden thing. Always seek the thing that has consensus around it. Anyone who makes a claim that they have something new and everyone before them missed it somehow, and now they have the real deal and the real thing, you have to be suspicious of that, because such a claim is not only casting suspicion upon the ulama and the tradition, it's actually casting suspicion upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hasha. It's like saying, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't really keep his promise when he said we will reveal the dhikr, we will reveal the remembrance, and we will preserve it. Because if people say that there was a period of time where it was not preserved, then how does that work into our worldview that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was preserving this religion and this way of life since the time of the Prophet ﷺ in the interim 1500 years or so since the hijrah of our Prophet ﷺ. So let's go to the text, inshallah. So we reach the 18th discourse, and the general theme here, in the beginning at least, the Shaykh talks about al-Jihad al-Akbar or al-Jihad al-Asghar, or what he refers to, Jihad al-Zahir or Jihad al-Batin. So it's sometimes referred to as Jihad al-Akbar, the greater jihad, and the lesser jihad. So the greater jihad being the one where one has to continually contend with their ego and their appetite, what we refer to as an-nafs. And then the Jihad al-Asghar, which is the martial tradition in Islam, which is for defense of deen or defense of personal property or one's personal physical body or of one's land. So, and he says that the Jihad al-Akbar or Jihad al-Zahir, Jihad al-Batin, right, is the internal jihad, is the more difficult one that people have to contend with. So he says, رضي الله عنه, قد أخبرك الله عز وجل بجهادين ظاهر وباطن، فالباطن جهاد النفس والهوى والطبع والشيطان، والتوبة عن المعاصي والزلات والثبات عليها وترك الشهوات المحرمات، والظاهر جهاد الكفار المعاندين له ولرسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ومقاصد سيوفهم ورماحهم وسهامهم يقتلون ويقتلون، فالجهاد الباطن أصعب من الجهاد الظاهر لأن شيء ملازم متكرر، وكيف لا يكون أصعب من الجهاد الظاهر وهو قطع مألوفات النفس من المحرمات وهجرانها وامتثال أوامر الشرع والانتهاء عن نهيه، فمن امتثل أمر الله عز وجل في الجهادين حصت له المجازات دنيا وآخرة. الجراحات في جسد الشهيد كالفصل في يد أحدكم لا ألم لها عنده، والموت في حق المجاهد لنفسه التائب من ذنوبه كشرب العطشان للماء البارد. So he says here, Allah Almighty has informed you about two battles, jihadain, the outer and the inner. The inner one, al-Batin, is a battle with the self, the passions, natural impulses, and Satan, as well as repentance from sins and mistakes, the maintaining of that repentance, and the renunciation of forbidden desires. The outer, al-Zahir, is the battle with the unbelievers who stubbornly opposed him and his messenger ﷺ, involving exposure to their swords, their spears, and their arrows, killing and being killed. The inner battle is therefore more difficult than the outer battle because it is something continuous and recurring. How could it not be harder than the outer battle when it entails a separation and exile of the self from the forbidden things to which it is habitually accustomed, obedience to the commandments of the sacred law, shara, and avoidance of what that law prohibits? If someone carries out the commandment of Allah Azza wa Jal in both kinds of jihad, he will receive his reward in this world and in the hereafter. Wounds inflicted on the body of the martyr, the shaheed, are like an incision in a vein on the hand of one of you. He feels no pain from them. Death, in the case one who does battle with his own self, mujahid nafsihi, and who repents his sins, is like a draught of cold water to a thirsty man. So he draws a comparison between the two, and some of the scholars have actually said that the jihad in nafs, there is a type of overcoming an opponent, overcoming an enemy, and some of them refer to as al-maut al-ahmar, the red death, right, which is the death of the nafs, or the death of the nafs al-shahwaniyah, or nafs al-ammara bis-su'. So nafs in this case means the lowest type of nafs, right? Not the enlightened nafs when we start talking about al-nafs al-mutma'inna, wal-nafs al-mulhama, wal-nafs al-radiyah, wal-mardiyah, wal-kamila. But the lower appetite sort of nafs, when the nafs al-shahwaniyah, when the passionate soul, or the soul of appetites and ego and desire, and that's in control, overcomes all other aspects of your humanity. And so it becomes that every aspect of your life, right, is somehow governed and informed by this aspect of the ego and the passion and the desire. So the things that you seek out in life, and the things that you wait for, and the things that you dream about, and the things that you aspire to, all go back to things that are just merely pleasurable to this lower nafs, to its appetite, whether it be of a carnal kind, or if it's an appetite of food, or what we call the intellectual appetites, which is hubb al-riyasa, for example, to the love of leadership, and the love of being famous and being praised and lauded and noticed and known. Those are also sorts of appetites, to feel better than your other people. And then when these feelings start to stir inside one, then they lead to su'ul akhlaq. It leads to bad inner character traits. So that's why envy and jealousy and enmity and rancor and al-hirs, covetousness, these are all aspects of the nafs, because they are all the things that fuel it and drive it to seek those things that are going to be pleasurable to it. So al-jihad al-akbar, or jihad al-batin, right, the inner jihad then is overcoming those aspects, overcoming the appetites of the ego and the lower soul, the lower nafs, in order so that you may ascend to a more actualized version, or a better version of yourself. So every single human being has the potential to transcend that aspect of what they are. Everyone has that potential. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides to take you from that, then He will suppress those aspects that are within you, that are still intrinsic to you, right? That are still part of you, but He will suppress those aspects, and then the aspects that are more divinely inspired, more angelic, al-akhlaq al-hamida, the praiseworthy character traits of, the opposites of what we just mentioned. So good character, and mahabba, love, and tawbah, and ithar, and preferring others over yourself, and tawada, and humility, and compassion, rahmah, mercy. All these things then are allowed to come up to the surface, because they come from the sir, right? They come from the innermost being, and then they affect the heart, the qalb, and then your nafs becomes transformed. So now you're no longer the nafs al-shahwaniyah, you're no longer just the passionate soul. Maybe you go on to be a nafs al-lawwama, right? Which is the blaming soul. So sometimes it does something right, sometimes it does something wrong. And that's really the hal al-murid, right? That's the state of the salik or the murid, the one who is trying, all of us, we're trying to do better, and sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't get it right. And then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires of you to take you out of this, and He wants to put you in a place of itminan, a place of serenity and sakina, and to give you a taste of Jannat al-Ma'rifah, give you a taste of the Jannah in this life, the Jannah of more intimate knowledge of God, then we can say that nafs is then nafs al-mulhama, right? Then it becomes the inspired soul. And then from the inspired soul, then it can go on to a nafs al-mutma'inna, then a nafs al-radiyah, thumma nafs al-mardiyah, thumma nafs al-kamila, right? The 7 souls that al-Qadir al-Jilani talked about and other scholars, based upon the 3 that we find in the Quran specifically, namely an-nafs al-ammara bis-su', the inciting soul, or the shahwaniyah, the passionate soul, and then the nafs al-lawwama, which is the blaming soul, and then an-nafs al-mutma'inna, which is mentioned in the ayat Surah Al-Fajr, ayat wa-nafs al-mutma'inna al-jir'i rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. So there is type of an ishara to an-nafs al-radiyah wal-mardiyah. So irji'i rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah fadkhuli fi ibadi wadkhuli jannati, right? Fadkhuli fi ibadi, so enter into my worship or into the ubudiyyah, wadkhuli jannati, right? Al-Jannah here could mean Jannat al-Firdaus, or it could mean Jannat al-Ma'arif, could mean the garden of greater intimate knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as we can discern from the methodology of Sidi Abdul Qadir, that he says one of the key elements to that is an istislam, right? Is to acquiesce. So yes, do the fara'id and do the sunan and stay away from the muharramat, but then there's an inner aspect, right, which is to have this istislam, this acquiescence, this contentment and rida and acceptance of one's circumstances in life, and not to let that distract one to the degree where now the appetitive or the passionate soul now sees an opening, or has a like a fursa, like an opportunity by which to then come back into control. So let's see what else he mentions in this regard. So he says in another section, right after the one paragraph later, يا قوم آمنوا بهذا القرآن واعملوا به وأخلصوا في أعمالكم لا تراءوا ولا تنافقوا في أعمالكم ولا تطلبوا الحمد من الخلق والأعواض عليها منهم. أحد أفراد من الخلق يؤمنون بهذا القرآن يعملون به لوجه الله عز وجل، ولهذا قل المخلصون وكثر المنافقون. ما أكسلكم في طاعة الله عز وجل وأقواكم في طاعة عدوه وعدوكم الشيطان الرجيم. القوم يتمنون ألا يخلوا من تكاليف الحق عز وجل، قد علموا أن في الصبر على تكاليفه وأقضيته وأقداره خيرا كثيرا دنيا وآخرة، يوافقونه في تصاريفه وتقاليبه، تارة في الصبر وتارة في الشكر، تارة في القرب وتارة في البعد، تارة في التعب، تارة في الراحة، تارة في الغنى وتارة في الفقر، تارة في العافية وتارة في المرض. كل أمنيتهم حفظ قلوبهم مع الحق عز وجل، هذا هو أهم الأشياء إليهم. يتمنون سلامتهم وسلامة الخلق مع الخالق عز وجل، ما يزالون يسألون الحق عز وجل في مصالح الخلق. يا غلام كن صحيحا تكن فصيحا، كن صحيحا في الحكم تكن فصيحا في العلم، كن صحيحا في السر تكن فصيحا في العلانية. كل السلامة في طاعة الحق عز وجل، وهي امتثال جميع ما أمر به والانتهاء عن جميع ما نهى عنه والصبر على جميع ما قضى به. من استجاب الله عز وجل أجابه، ومن أطاعه طوع له جميع خلقه. So this is a good important section that kind of illustrates what we were talking about before. And that if you go to page 119, the second paragraph, O my people, believe in this Quran and put it into practice and be sincere in your actions. Do not pretend, do not be hypocritical in your conduct. Do not seek praise from people or look to them to reward you for your deeds. right? And this could be zahir and batin, right? Even when you're looking reward from people, you may be actually like saying, very, blatant about it, and doing certain things in front of them so that you may be noticed. Or it could be just having that feeling in your heart, wishing that, oh, if this person knew that I was a good person, or that I actually, pray a lot, and I'm a pious person, then I think they would, consider me to be part of their inner circle or their group or whatever it is. And all that's awad, right? That's seeking some sort of recompense, some sort of payback for the deeds that you do. And you should make them solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why he says only a few individuals among the people believe in this Quran and put it into practice for the sake of Allah. Yani both. Not just have it on the shelf and then it comes out in Ramadan and that's when we read it, but it's like it's who they are, right? There's a daily relationship, there's a daily connection, there's a pondering of its meanings, right? When they have a relationship with the Quran, when they go to sleep, they hear the verses, right? And they're repeating themselves. The verses are repeating themselves in his or her head, and they're contemplating them. So there's even on a level of subconscious, when you get into something, and this is true about anything, whether it's for batil or for haqq, whether for truth or whether it's falsehood, you spend enough time with it, right? And you get it into kind of your thought process, then even in your subconscious, you'll be thinking about it, right? There will be a type of maybe openings and understandings that will come to it. And the opposite is true. If you spend it all in falsehood, if the first thing you do when you wake up is watch Netflix, and the last thing you do before you go to sleep is watch Netflix, there's a good chance you're going to be dreaming about what was on Netflix, right? So, but in order to transcend that and to get above and beyond that, you have to really discipline yourself a little bit. Yes, it's true, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bring anyone out of anything as he likes. But should we wait for some sort of karama or miracle from God for that to happen? Or should we take the initiative on our part and do our part and at least have what's called sidq al-tawajjuh? Some of them said, what is tasawwuf? It's sidq al-tawajjuh. It's turning sincerely towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, this is why the sincere are so few and the hypocrites are so many. How lazy you are in obeying Allah, and how energetic you are in obeying his enemy and your own enemy, Satan the accursed. The people of Allah wish never to be free of obligation imposed by al-Haqq, the Lord of Truth, since they know that in patience with his obligations, his takalif, his judgments, his aqdiyah, and his decrees, al-Aqdar, there lies much good for this world and the hereafter. They harmonize with him in his tasarif, right, his operations, and taqalib, transformations, sometimes in patience and sometimes in gratitude, sometimes in nearness and sometimes in remoteness. In other words, how you feel inside. So there's an adab, there's an etiquette to be observed in each one of those particular situations. So whether you feel close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a certain etiquette with that. And if you feel far away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's also a certain etiquette. If you have calamity, there's a certain etiquette. If you feel that you're in bliss, there's a certain etiquette. So sometimes in nearness, sometimes in remoteness, sometimes in weary labor, sometimes in repose, sometimes in affluence, and sometimes in poverty, sometimes in health, and sometimes in sickness. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these taqallubat, right, or taqalib, from one to the next, is actually so that it can evoke a particular spiritual response from you. That's what Allah wants from you. لا تستطيع أن تدفع الضر عن نفسك, right? You can't remove harm that was destined for it to come to you. So don't dwell upon that part. But what you should be busy with is, okay, what is my adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This sickness that came to me, la qaddar Allah, or any of us, we didn't wish that. We didn't want that. And we don't have the power really to repel it. It's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's a certain etiquette and adab. So there should be taslim, there should be a type of sabr at least, or even hopefully better than that, there should be rida and contentment and knowing that, things are cyclical. So this thing where you're feeling in this kind of constriction now or qabd, that there's going to be a period of bust and Allah is going to take you out of that and He's going to give you expansion. Wallahu yaqbidu wa yabsutu, right? Allah yaqbid wa yabsut. He is the one who constricts and He is the one who expands. But to the one who we're going to return to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. وَاللَّهُ يَقْبِضُ وَيَبْسُطُ وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. But The one that we are always going back to, right? راجعين إليه, يعني we're in the process as we speak, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one day you may even transcend this whole concept of qabd and bast, of feeling expanded or constricted, and then feeling how motivated you are for ibadah, and you just have observance of the hukum, right? Of the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as it runs through you, almost as if you were a third party watching it. And then you transcend qabd and bast and sadness and happiness, and rather you are immersed and busy with the mushahada, with the witnessing of the divine and everything. And that's what Sayyid Abd al-Qadir is trying to get us to, or at least to think about and to realize. So their entire aspiration then is to keep their hearts safe with the Lord of Truth. This is the most important thing of all to them, right? Salamat al-sadr, keep our hearts safe. They wish for their own salvation, as-salama, and the salvation of all creatures, al-khalq, with the Creator, al-Khaliq. They never cease begging the Lord of Truth for the benefit of all creatures. Be correct, right? And we've seen this phrase a lot from the Shaykh, sahih wa sihha, right? Be correct, be valid, be salim, and be, spiritually fit. Then you will be eloquent, fasih. Be correct in the hukum, then you'll be eloquent in learning, right? In al-ahkam, in sharia. Be correct in secret, then you'll be eloquent in public. The whole of well-being, salama, lies in the obedience to the Lord of Truth, Azza wa Jal. That is to say, in carrying out everything He has commanded, avoiding everything He has forbidden, and bearing with patience everything He has decreed. When someone responds to the wishes of Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will respond to that person's prayer, and when someone obeys Him, He will make all His creatures obedient to that person. So the idea then is to have the proper adab and etiquette, as we mentioned, in all of our affairs, in all of our dealings, whatever situation, whatever circumstance comes our way from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we do that, and at the same time we put Allah as our priority, and then we have taqwa, and we avoid the prohibitions, and we do the commands of God, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the things that we're waiting for Him to give to us, or that we're expecting for Him to give to us, then inshallah they will be forthcoming, right? Because, the openings and the enlightenment and the kind of ladha fil ibadah, the pleasure in worshiping God and those things, those are things from Allah to you, not from you to Allah. So it's better to do what Allah asks of you, and then ask Him for help in fulfilling those things that Allah has asked of you, and then leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Don't let that be the main motivator, that you get these things in return from Allah, because it's still a recompense, right? If you worship Allah because you're waiting for an opening from God, then you're still asking for something in return for your ibadah, for your deeds. Rather, you should worship Him because He's the one worthy of being worshipped, right? And you are having mushahada of His jamal and His jalal and His kamal, and you are witnessing His beauty and His majesty and His perfection and completeness, rather than waiting for something to come or to be forthcoming. We should never be, in a position where we're saying, "Oh, well, I'm waiting for Allah to do this for me." That's almost like adab. It's almost like bad form, bad etiquette with God, because He's already doing things for you. Your very breath, your very existence is completely dependent upon His willing it. And so then when you say something like, "Well, I'm waiting for Allah to answer this, or waiting for Allah to do that," seize the moment that you're in. Kun ibn al-waqt, right? Be the son or the daughter of the moment that you're in. See the obligations of that particular moment, and then do your best to fulfill them, inshallah. Allah ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen.